It's the All Things Strange podcast. We are your hosts, Agent Anderson
and Agent Ether.
Come along for UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can find all of our wonderful links in the description on the Linktree, where you can find our Discord, our Patreon, our merchandise, and more. This week's episode, the Levelland Lights.
So you know how we were supposed to be doing research for this topic?
Yeah.
I was doing research on a topic that we already discussed.
Which one?
The Lubbock Lights.
Did you do your whole thing on the Lubbock Lights?
No, it was like 2 minutes in and I was like, wait a second.
This sounds familiar.
This all sounds familiar. I've done this before. Yeah, I was like looking in the Blue Book files for cases around this date for Lubbock. And I was like, that's not right. This is in South Carolina or North Carolina. I was like, we just did this.
Yeah, so the Lubbock Lights, that was from 1951, and that was, we're doing the Levelland Lights. The Lubbock Lights, that was 1951, and that's actually about 20 miles east of Levelland. So these two cases happened, really within walking distance, if you don't mind a long walk, but at least a very short drive. I mean, that's, depending on how fast you drive, that's like a 10-minute drive right there.
And we did the Lubbock Lights for a bonus episode?
I don't know. I'd have to check, but we definitely did the Lubbock Lights before. I might have been a regular episode. And also, there was a whole chapter about it in Ruppelt's book.
Which you read.
So if we didn't do a regular episode on it, there's a whole chapter on it, which I read for the show. So we probably have 2 episodes out there on the Lubbock Lights, which are really cool. I mean, that was a really great episode. I think you were on that one, Ether.
I was.
But the Levelland Lights, so just to review, the Lubbock Lights, 1951. The Levelland Lights happened a few years later in 1957 on November 2 to 3. It was overnight. So it started at like 10:30 p.m. and it ended at, 2 or 3 in the morning or something is when the last reports came in. This is a really cool case that has multiple independent witnesses. It has people from all walks of life. Anytime you have a diverse set of witnesses, that's always a positive in my book. If you have just police officers or just farm workers or just this or that, then I don't know. I mean, it's possible you have a bunch of drinking buddies get together and decide to do a prank, I suppose. But when you have people who are completely unconnected to each other, different professions, different areas, just all over the place, you have multiple witnesses. That's one of the best things you could possibly ask for in a case like this. And then, obviously radar and trace evidence and that kind of stuff is also good. But it starts with multiple independent witnesses. This one was investigated. You could, sort of put that in quotes, sarcastically, investigated by Project Blue Book. The case coincided with the launching of Sputnik 1 and 2. Sputnik 1 was launched on October 4th, and its mission ended. It died on January 4th, 1958. And Sputnik 2 was November 3rd to April 14, 1958. So November 3rd, 1957, I should say, to make that clear. So those both overlapped this case. And just as a little footnote to history, they put a dog on Sputnik 2.
Amazing.
How fucked up is that?
Did the dog come back?
Well, no. They had no way to retrieve those vehicles. That was like the second thing ever put up into space. They didn't know what was going to happen. They're just like, we need to put something alive up there to see how long it stays alive. So the dog goes up on Sputnik 2. Cute little Poochie. You can find his picture online. I forgot his name. But he goes up there, and it wasn't like shielded or anything. So, the thing overheated, and basically the dog got cooked a few hours into the mission.
That sucks. I don't want to hear about that. Let's get back to the case.
That's messed up, dude. Scientists are pretty scary sometimes, Poor doggy.
Oh
Anyways,
my goodness.
the official explanation, we'll go ahead and jump the gun here. The official explanation of the Levelland Lights was ball lightning or
Or
whatever.
St. Elmo's fire.
Yeah. And the reason I mention that up front is because I want everybody listening to sort of have that in the back of their head as we go over the witness statements, And it's just hilarious to me that you're taking one thing that is anomalous and borderline paranormal as far as how often it's witnessed, and then using that to explain another paranormal thing, right? That's like if the Air Force said, "Oh, well, you saw a UFO." Nah, it was really just the ghost of Lincoln. You're not helping. You can't just take one thing that's paranormal and use it to, it doesn't work. Anyways, I just was kind of tickled by that explanation, especially the more you look into the case. But this explanation was disputed by many ufologists, in particular J. Allen Hynek and James E. McDonald. And they were actually they actually did testimony before a House of Reps committee. And for those of you outside of the United States, we have the House of Reps is a big part of our government, and they do sometimes have committees or hearings on UFOs. They have had those recently. And it just occurs to me that history is repeating itself, and it's worth looking into these older UFO cases because for me, when I see that there's a committee on, UFOs, I'm like, okay, well, they've done this many times in the past, and it's just going to be the same thing over and over again, where they're going to talk about stuff, but they're not going to really say anything, and they're going to say, okay, we'll just do this behind closed doors, where we're going to talk about the real stuff, and the public never gets to know what's actually going on.
Because of security.
Yeah, national security and all that.
That's what they say. Well, in the interest of national security, many of the topics you're interested in actually won't be discussed in public.
Yeah, which is really unfortunate because wouldn't it be nice to have an open discourse about this? Because there is a tremendous amount of evidence that we are being visited. I'm not aware of any hard proof, but hot damn, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and we're about to talk to some of it. Talk to some of it about some of it.
Talk to people? I wish we could interview these people.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
So in the area, there was no electrical storm. There was no lightning. There wasn't even some witnesses said maybe there's a little bit of a mist or something, but it wasn't really raining. So that's, ball lightning is no bueno. Project Blue Book did not even interview all of the witnesses. But at this point in time, in 1957, we are far past the golden years of Ruppelt, who actually did investigate things and well into the full debunk mode of Project Blue Book. And here's just a little quote from Wikipedia. In 1955, the Air Force decided that the goal of Project Blue Book should not be to investigate UFO reports, but to minimize the number of unidentified UFO reports. By late 1956, the number of unidentified sightings had dropped from the 20 to 25% of the Ruppelt era to less than 1%.
So they're just identifying things as weather balloons and Venus and that sort of thing. And instead of coming to a different conclusion, like, not possible to identify or perhaps a UFO, they have excuses.
Yeah, and Ruppelt, his unknowns were not all like, oh, it's aliens. He did have a category that was not enough data, right?
Yes, that's true.
Because there are plenty of cases that on the surface look pretty weird, but we just don't have enough data to evaluate if it was a natural phenomenon or not. We just don't know. And then you have the good cases. But, he gave it a fair shake. Ruppelt really did give it a fair shake, even if he did tend to be on the skeptical side of things. At least he actually investigated this stuff. By 1957, they were in full-blown mode to just explain it away as everything. It didn't really matter if the explanation fit the evidence, as long as there was some kind of explanation to make it a known quantity instead of unknown. In 57, the head of Blue Book was Captain George T. Gregory. And here's a quote from AFR 200-2. Well, not a quote, but AFR 200-2 was updated under his supervision to say that unidentifieds must be reduced to a minimum. And the way they did this was assigning explanations to cases without even investigating them. And we've looked through the cases before. We've done, I think, 8 episodes on Project Blue Book at this point. So we've talked about this before. I don't think we need to belabor the point. And that's just kind of some background as to what was going on with Blue Book in 57 and, just basic surrounding the case type stuff. The first sighting happened at 10:50 p.m., and the witnesses were Pedro Saucedo, who was a Korean War vet, and Jose Salaz, Salaz. How would you pronounce that?
Salaz.
Salaz? I don't think that's right.
Well, I think that you should continue.
Well, I guess we're not good at pronouncing stuff anyways. So they were driving in Saucedo's truck towards Pettit, which was 10 miles north of Levelland, when they saw a flash of light to the right of the road. They didn't really pay too much attention to it at first. I guess, in Texas, you do have probably some lightning storms occasionally, so they probably just thought it was lightning or something. And then they saw a light in the distance that paralleled their truck and seemed to get closer. And then, suddenly, the truck's headlights went out and their engine stopped. And we have a witness statement here. Would you care to read that, Agent Ether?
Sure. This is from the Tucson Daily Citizen, because almost immediately after these sightings, you just had television and newspapers and all kinds of media coming into the area to take reports, write up stories, and interview witnesses. So I actually found quite a bit of clippings in Project Blue Book. So Pedro says, and I quote, "I was driving near Petite Saturday night with Joe Salaz when we first saw the thing. We first saw a flash of light in a field to our right, and we didn't think much about it at first. When it got near, the lights of my truck went out and the motor died. I jumped out and hit the dirt because I was afraid. I called to Joe, but he didn't get out. The thing passed over my truck with a great sound and rush of the wind. It sounded like thunder, and my truck rocked from the blast. I felt a lot of heat. Then I got up and watched it go out of sight towards Levelland."
Yeah, and I saw in a different statement that it was his military training. Anytime there's danger, you take cover. And his friend just stayed in the truck, just kind of like, welp, we'll see what happens with this one, I guess. What are you supposed to do in that situation, right? There's really not much you can do. After it left, the lights came back on their car and they were able to restart the engine. And they said that the craft looked like it was about 200 feet long. And I think they said it looked like a really big, like, torpedo or missile. All right, so that was the first sighting of the evening with Pedro Saucedo and his friend. By the way, vote for Pedro, right?
I don't know.
You haven't seen that movie?
No.
Oh, never mind then. All right, so next up, actually, that's not quite the end of that one. So they were kind of scared and they drove to the nearest town and called the police. They did not go to Levelland because they were too scared. They did not want to run into the UFO again, so they didn't want to go in the same direction. So they went to the next closest town that wasn't in the direction of the UFO, called the police, and they got in touch with one Officer A.J. Fowler. They reported it, and Officer Fowler did not take the report seriously at all. He was just like, yeah, okay, cool beans, bro. UFO, nice. Catch you later. Even though Fowler said that Pedro seemed like he was shaken up or terrified, he still just thought it was some kind of hoax. Until ... they got a bunch more reports.
A flood of reports, from what I understand.
Yeah, they got a ton of reports. We don't even know all of the witnesses. We only have some of them, and there are way more than we normally have for one of these cases. The next one, chronologically, was around midnight. A guy named Jim Wheeler was driving on Route 116 about 4 miles east of Levelland when he saw a 200-foot egg-shaped object blocking the road. It was brightly lit. When he got closer to it, his motor died and his car lost all power, radio and headlights and all that stuff. He got out of the car and the object shot straight up into the air and it disappeared When it was gone, his lights came back on and he was able to restart his car. Did you have anything specific on Jim Wheeler?
No, no, I did not because I focused on Project Blue Book and they actually interviewed a limited number of
Like
witnesses,
nobody. Two.
like 2 or 3. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they actually, I think I read they interviewed like 4 or 5 people or something, but only 2 of those were actual witnesses who had seen the craft. So they just interviewed randos, I guess. I don't know. All right. Also around this time, Jose Alvarez was 11 miles north of town on Route 51, and he also saw an object blocking the road and had his car shut off before the object left, and then he was able to restart it. Pretty much exactly like Jim Wheeler's case. I couldn't find as much on Joe Alvarez. Just a little description that he also had a similar encounter north of town. And if you look at the timestamps on these and the locations, it suggests to me that there could possibly be multiple vehicles, multiple UFOs, because you're having almost simultaneous sightings, like nearly simultaneous. And then the next one in chronological order happened at 5 minutes past midnight. Now we're talking about November 4th. We've switched over to November 4th. This is Texas Tech student Newell Wright, Newellwright. He was about 9 miles east of Levelland, and he was 1 mile west of Smyre on Route 116, so 116 again, heading towards Levelland, when all of a sudden, the ammeter for his car, that's like your battery meter, started to fluctuate wildly, and then his motor gradually went out along with his headlights and radio. Did you have a witness statement for Mr. Newell Wright here?
I have one for Ronald Martin, which is similar. Do you have anything else on Wright?
Yes, I do. So I'll continue. Wright was one of the 2 witnesses, actually. Pedro and Newell Wright were the 2 witnesses they actually did interview that I saw, anyways. But I'll continue with his story though. So he got out of his car and opened the hood to check the battery and just cables or whatever's going on under there, wires and whatnot. There's nothing obviously wrong with his vehicle, so he closed the hood, and then as he turned around to get back into his car, he saw an oval object blocking the road in front of him. He said it was flat on the bottom like a loaf of bread and had a bluish-green tint. He described it as about 100 feet long. He got back in his car in somewhat of a panic and tried to restart his car, but it wouldn't start. His car was totally dead. It hovered there for about 3 or 4 minutes before it rose up from the road at an angle, mostly vertical, but at an angle, and it flew off to the north. And when it moved, it disappeared in an instant, almost like it was there and then it was gone. And after it was gone, he was able to restart his car.
So I have a statement again from the Tucson Daily Citizen.
Okay.
A little similar. One Ronald Martin, who's 18. He's a truck driver.
Oh yeah. Well, can we wait on that because we have one more to get to chronologically before Ronald Martin.
Okay.
Okay. So the next one I have chronologically is at 12:15. So 10 minutes later, Frank Williams was on the road near where Jose Alvarez had his sighting, and he also had his same thing. His car shut off, and he saw an object that had a slow pulsating light. Each time the light would pulse on, his car would, like the lights and everything would dim, and then when the light pulsed off, then he would get his headlights back and his radio back and that kind of stuff. So I couldn't find a whole lot on that one, but that's, we did have a Frank Williams sighting at 12:15, and around this time, there were a lot of reports flooding into the police office, and I'm guessing there are tons of reports that we don't even have access to because they weren't really recorded in a meaningful way. So unfortunately, we've probably missed out on a lot of witnesses. And then the next one I have is at 12:45, Ronald Martin. So did you want to go with that one?
I just have a statement.
Okay.
He said that he's a truck driver, first of all. And he said his engine died and the lights went out when a big ball of fire dropped onto the highway. It turned to a bluish color, then the fireball color again when it rose straight up and disappeared.
Yeah, and it's very similar to the other sightings where he lost power. This one was also on Route 116 and just, landed in front of his truck and shenanigans ensued. The next one I have is at 1:15 a.m. A one Mr. James Long, Jimmy Long. Do you have anything on James Long?
Mr. Long, let's see. James D. Long of Waco said he was driving near Levelland yesterday when he encountered an object sitting on the road. He said that he got out of his car 200 feet away to investigate, but that when he did, the object suddenly took off with a roar straight into the air. Mr. Long said his engine coughed and died, and his headlights suddenly went out. Two other persons in the Levelland area said the objects passed over their car with a roar around the same time. The engines of their cars died, and the headlights went out too.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I had for James Long. Different words that said the exact same thing, basically.
And this was from the United Press.
Okay. The next sighting I have was actually at 1:30, Sheriff Clem and a deputy. I didn't catch
McCulloch.
McCulloch, is that the deputy? Okay, so you have something on this?
Just a little brief paragraph. It
Okay.
was him and his Pat McCulloch, his deputy, spotted the object streaking across the sky in front of their car. Mr. Clem says it lit up the whole pavement in front of us for about 2 seconds.
Yeah, and then the quote I have from him is that a streak of neon red light crossing the highway less than a quarter of a mile ahead that lit up the whole pavement in front of us for about 2 seconds.
You know, what's interesting is a couple of witnesses described it as neon.
Right.
Like a neon color.
Yeah, so we do have a variety of witness accounts. They're all very similar, but some of them described a pulsing light. Most of them described it glowing in some way. Many of them described it as like a red neon light or a blue light. Some of them said that when it moved, it turned red. We have the size estimates tend to be 100 to 200 feet. And I kind of think that you even have like Pedro and what was his friend's name? Pedro said it was like 200 feet and his friend said it was like 125 feet or something like that. And I kind of chalk that up to when you have something that's in the air or something that's bigger than normal, it can be extremely difficult to estimate the size. You don't believe me? The next time you go to an airport, when you see an airplane on the ground in the distance, estimate the size and then look up that airplane. Most of you probably can't identify airplanes, so maybe not a great example. But if you can tell what kind of airplane you're flying on, look it up. You might be surprised at the results. For example, one time I was actually able to sit in the cockpit on the ground for a 747, and that cockpit on a 747 on the ground, the cockpit is like 80 feet off the ground. It's crazy. It doesn't look like that from a distance. From a distance, you might guess it's 30 feet off the ground. But dude, those 747s they're ridiculous. Those things are monsters.
The biggest plane I ever rode on was like a double-decker.
Yeah, 747 was a double-decker.
That's probably what I rode on because
Yeah.
my dad used to be in the military in the service. So when we went overseas, we would go on these big Airbuses.
Right. I'm not sure Airbus was even around back then. Maybe.
I don't
I'm
know.
not sure.
I just remember it was a freaking huge airplane. Well, you're a
Yeah.
kid though. Everything's big when you're a kid.
Right. Did it have 2 aisles?
I don't know. It was a long time ago.
I only flew on a 747 once, and I remember it having 2 aisles.
I just remember aisles and people and just big.
Yeah. And that's a good setup for first class. Because unless I'm wrong, they used to put the first class upstairs, so
Oh,
they didn't have to deal with the riffraff at all. They got like their whole cabin to themselves.
that's ridiculous. No riffraff for you.
Yeah. But I don't know why, for whatever reason, I think airplanes tend to have gotten smaller since then.
Economy.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they have anything as big as a 747 flying. I'd have to check.
Do you have other witnesses?
Of course I do. The next one I have is sometime after 1 a.m. I couldn't find an exact time. Fire Marshal Ray Jones, he was north of Clem and James Long's sighting, also saw a similar object. Same thing, his lights dimmed, his motor almost died. but then they came back on. This one's a little different because his stuff would like dim out, like kind of like his car was slowly running out of gas or a generator running out of gas. It'll like putter down and then putter back up, but so it wouldn't die all the way, but it would just kind of like almost die and then come back. But still, we have somebody who saw something similar that caused electrical effects on his car, and that's pretty much all I could find on that one. Did you see anything for?
No, I have
No?
I have a blue book file with lots of redacted names. So when you're ready for that.
Okay, and then the last thing I have for the primary, I guess, incident is there was an incident in Pettit, which, that was where the first one, Pedro was close to Pettit. Pedro and his friend, they were up there to the north. And there's an incident where two combine harvesters had their power shut off around this time. So, around 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., I guess. And I couldn't really find more on this case. If I searched, I probably could find information on this. But I just saw a mention of the Pettit incident where two combine harvesters had their power shut off, and that's all I could find. There's a UFO, they lost their power, and that's all I could find on that one in a short amount of time because there's so much to look into in this case. So yeah, that's like the main outline of events, but there's a lot more we want to talk about. So Agent Ether, you look like you're rip roaring ready to go with that Blue Book file.
I got so much stuff over here. I'm trying to like fit it in where it makes sense.
Well, sometimes with the case like this, where you have so much going on in so many different places, it's really hard to fit it together in like a linear narrative. So instead, I used to try to do that, but it's more or less impossible. So instead, let's just talk about separate topics under the same umbrella.
Speaking of topic, when did Kehoe write his book?
He wrote multiple books, but I could look up his first book, which I think was The Flying Saucers Were Real. Are real. The Flying Saucers Are Real. Kehoe, which, by the way, I have read this book on my podcast.
That's why I was asking you.
Let's see when this was published. Printed in paperback in 1950.
Okay.
Sold for 25 cents.
So this actually might be from his book, but for some reason, there's lots of redactions.
But the book was published in 1950, 7 years before this.
Right.
And the book was based...
Oh, that's true.
The book was based on an article from True Magazine that was published in 1949. It was an elaboration of that article, basically. So... probably not from this book, but it could be from one of his other books.
It says Kehoe.
He wrote a lot of books.
So it says Levelland, Texas, Highway 116, November 2nd. Two witnesses just before midnight were driving to town with a passenger, redacted, when a huge torpedo-shaped object descended towards the highway. It had a bluish-green glow, and it appeared to be 150 to 200 feet long. As the mysterious object came closer, the car lights dimmed, then the engine sputtered and died. Redacted jumped out and dived under the truck to watch, and the other passenger watched from the cab. The object settled close to the ground. Whether it landed or was just hovering off the ground, Redacted could not tell because the blue-green light was too bright. For 2 or 3 minutes, the UFO remained there, then it quickly lifted, its glow changing to red as it climbed. Shaken, Redacted got back into his truck, the lights and the ignition now working correctly, and he drove into Levelland. He told the sheriff his story with Redacted as a witness. At first, Sheriff Weir Clem was incredulous, but in the next hour he learned of 4 other cases where lights had been dimmed and engines stopped by the low approach of what might be the same object. While Redacted was checking one report, he and Deputy Redacted saw a weird glow that was the same object pass over the highway, also seen by Redacted and Redacted, following in separate cars at 1:30 a.m.
So that sounds like the sighting by Pedro Saucedo and Jose Salaz.
Yeah, but a torpedo?
Yeah, that is one of the descriptions I saw.
That's a strange description. I didn't see any other descriptions like that. It was like a torpedo.
I saw so many different descriptions for this thing. It's kind of hard to know where to start, you know?
Yeah.
He did describe it as torpedo, and so I didn't put that in here, but yeah. And then the other one that you read sounded like it might be, it might have been, where's the officer's name again? Sheriff Clem, right? That Sheriff Clem sighting?
Yes, it
Yeah.
was.
But it says in there that Sheriff Clem, it wasn't just him and a deputy, there were other witnesses there as well.
Yes, including a trucker from Antone, Texas, and someone from Waco.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. All right.
You got any other witnesses over there?
Well, I have other incidents, but not for the Levelland Lights. That was like a basic timeline of what happened. And each one of these cases, you could go into a lot more detail if you're able to find like the original statements or, interviews of the subjects or whatever. But unfortunately, we'll talk about that later, but they weren't interviewed. I think we already said that.
Yeah, but at the same time, there was an investigation. It just wasn't a military investigation. You did have researchers coming in very quickly into the area.
Okay.
Right? Ufologists?
I didn't really see a whole lot about that.
Oh, Mr. Lee rushed yesterday upon hearing that the latest objects seen by at least 9 persons in 2 states were, I can't read this because it's from a newspaper, but he'd spent 20 years studying aerial phenomena and said he believed the mysterious object seen in West Texas and New Mexico was indeed a spacecraft.
Sounds like a spacecraft to me.
He was from the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena and a director of the Interplanetary Space Patrol.
I want to be on the Interplanetary Space Patrol. That sounds awesome.
There must have been an investigation outside of the military, or this must be a quote from a book. There's a page in here, and I'm not sure why it's in Project Blue Book. The writer talks about how the Air Force took unusual steps to investigate the case and how they looked into different reports but claimed there wasn't a flying saucer in the lot. So they only got 5 reports, this paper says, out of the hundreds received, or at least that's what the Air Force claimed. And was the Air Force perhaps practicing frugality? It mentions that each major trackdown cost $10,000 to send out investigators, paying transportation expenses and sending planes aloft to investigate intruders, take pictures of perhaps Venus, plus administrative work. Do you think that's true, that it cost them $10,000 a case?
$10,000
back then? That doesn't seem right at all.
I don't think so, because especially in the case of Levelland, you could send somebody out to investigate a whole heap of people in the same area. It wouldn't cost $10,000 per interview. There's no way.
I'm not sure from this paper if the Air Force is claiming it costs $10,000 or if the writer is saying it costs $10,000. Because on the one hand, the Air Force might say, hey, we can't track down and investigate everything because it's too expensive. Or the writer might be saying, well, the Air Force didn't do due diligence because it's too expensive.
Yeah, I'm guessing that the Air Force is saying that, and that they're using some creative accounting.
Right.
For example, to fly over to the area, they could probably jump on a plane that's already going there anyways for whatever reason. But let's say it's a transport aircraft that's transporting stuff from one point to another. And, like what is it, C-130 or I don't know, whatever, something like that, big cargo plane. And they could say, well, that cargo plane cost us $5 million to buy. And then, I don't know, is that how much those things cost? I have no idea. And then they could say, well, based on that, each trip costs this amount of money and blah, blah, blah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, this much in fuel. But they leave out the fact that plane was going there anyways. And the person going over there is just taking a jump seat that's actually costing the Air Force nothing at all. And then they could say, well, this person's salary is this much a day, and they could add that to the cost, when in reality, that person's getting paid whether they're sitting in the office clipping out newspaper clippings of UFOs or they're going in person to investigate them. They get paid the same. So that's also a fixed cost. So it's, I don't know, the cost is, if the Air Force is saying that, the cost is probably quite a lot less than what they're claiming. I'm guessing. I don't know. Just a guess.
Yeah, that's what I think the paper's saying. So to reiterate, this is just a little blurb I found in Project Blue Book. No information as to the writer's identity, but definitely not military or government with this tone.
Yeah.
And I just want to read this one paragraph. Investigators said that they could only find 3 witnesses who actually saw the big light. The miracle is they found as many as 3, for we know exactly what Air Force investigations lead to. The Daily Sun reported Air Force mystery man leaves the city, identity cloaked in secrecy.
Ooh.
The anonymous visitor drove an Air Force vehicle, wore civilian clothes, and said, quote, he could not give his name or any identification. Around noon on the 6th, he spent 30 minutes in Sheriff Clem's office. He returned at 2:30 p.m. for another half an hour. About 3 p.m., he headed for Lubbock. He came back at 6:30, said to the sheriff, well, I'm done, and drove off into the dark, drippy night. You like that?
What is this, a novel?
Adds the paper, which was the Daily Sun, there was never any hint as to what he found out or whether he was really a civilian or an Air Force officer. Does the Air Force call this a major trackdown? We won't even bother to laugh. So who's writing this and why is it in Blue Book?
I don't know. Blue Book will put all sorts of things. They'll just stick stuff in the files, and they've actually done things where like they've not reopened cases, but re-looked at cases, reinvestigated cases or whatever. And if they find newer stuff about those cases, they'll like, Ruppelt did this, I know, but I'm not sure if anybody after him did it, but he looked at cases that happened like in the late 40s before he was even there. And then if he found new information or new newspaper clippings or whatever, he would stick those in the files. So when you're looking through the files, sometimes you'll see a case that happened in, let's say, 1952, but you might see like a newspaper article from like 1965 that has just been like stuck in there as part of it. So you do find that kind of stuff sometimes.
So that's what I have for that strange little paper. Did you want me to continue with some other Blue Book files or?
Yeah, why don't you do your Blue Book stuff and then we'll continue on with, I basically just have left a bunch of related sightings that were not necessarily in Texas. And then I have a wrap it up kind of a deal. So why don't you do so we're doing basically 2 sections, the basic outline and then the Blue Book section.
All right. Well, I have next in the Blue Book files, there's a handwritten note. It looks like it's on a Post-it note, and it says, same report issued from Chicago. Quite circumstantial evidence, and then highlighted, look into. And the top, it says Levelland. And it says, James Lees of NICAP rushed down to the site of Texas report to find observers. Yeah, so it was James Lee.
Okay.
Who was doing the reporting. And I am guessing that what I read, that statement, is from him.
Yeah, it sounds like it was written by a reporter, doesn't it?
I don't think he was a reporter. I think he was a part of an institution.
Okay.
He's part of NICAP.
A lot of sass in that article that you read.
Very much so. Let's see. Redacted of Texas said he had spent 20 years studying flying saucers and said he thought it was a spacecraft from some of the neighboring planets. So that would be Lee. The object was reportedly seen in the vicinities of Midland, Texas, 110 miles south of Levelland, and Clovis, New Mexico, around 70 miles northwest of Levelland. Let's see, it's seen in Waco. It's seen in different parts of New Mexico, and he says these machines inside the object, and I quote, disturb the magnetic field of balance and will cause car engines to stall and compasses to go awry. Lee said he definitely did not think the object was launched by the U.S., although this area is near scientific proving grounds in the western part of the country. So this was a statement from NICAP from Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in Project Blue Book. And then, oh my God. Okay, so the next few pages are handwritten in cursive. I'm going to show Agent
Oh.
Anderson what I had to translate.
Yeah, those are, look at that. Those are always the hardest ones to read out of the files. They show up fairly often, and it's really hard to read somebody else's cursive. I could read my cursive all day long, not somebody else's.
I can read my cursive as well. And I can read this is just not good handwriting. And I don't know
Well,
how you could turn in a report like this and
you
expect
can
anyone to read it.
you can read your cursive, you can read anybody's cursive, but they use a different kind of cursive in the Blue Book
Oh,
files.
yeah. Or maybe just back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day, it's real hard to read.
So the page with with this handwriting says that the effects of gases don't create winds, and it's talking about the ball lightning theory, but how ball lightning doesn't create these gusts of wind that people were describing in a lot of the reports. And it says that ionized particles don't explain gusts of air, and the explanation has to be reasonable. And the author doesn't say whether or not it's reasonable, they just say that they don't create the winds that were observed by the witnesses.
Right. Ball lightning doesn't do anything described by the witnesses. It doesn't tend to hover in the same spot for 3 minutes. It doesn't tend to be 200 feet across and torpedo shaped. It doesn't tend to turn off electronics in cars. None of the things that the witnesses described have anything to do with ball lightning. That's a completely absurd explanation.
So I have a joint messaging form from the Air Force dated for the 2nd of November, and it has a message, it says in 8 parts, although I do not have all 8 parts. And it references the numerous press queries to the headquarters at the Air Force Base that require immediate findings. And from the wording of that paragraph, I think what they're asking is for an official public report to release to the media because there's been such a flurry of activity.
Yeah, this case set off a media firestorm. It was national news, probably even international news. And as you might expect from something like this, people were a little concerned. So they did make a public statement.
So it talks about different parts. In part 1, there's a sighting in the Gulf of Mexico from the Coast Guard that's contrary to press reports. It doesn't say how.
I'll talk about that one in a bit.
Okay, then I'll skip the stuff that is hard to read and move forward. Do you talk about... Oh, this is Texas. So, contrary to media reports, there were only 3 witnesses in Levelland. That's what this official report says. And that they concluded their investigation proceeding satisfactorily. In contrast to Kehoe's and Washington's press reports, only 3 and not 9 persons witnessed the incident. Now that's weird. It mentions Kehoe directly.
Interesting.
It does. And earlier we read an article where it references Kehoe as well.
Yeah, I saw that Project Blue Book, some of the higher ups were busy dealing with the Kehoe situation.
Interesting.
I'm not sure what they're referring to when they say the Kehoe situation. They didn't give any more details than that, but I just saw that somewhere.
The joint message form continuation sheet, which just means the next page, says the objects were only observed for a few seconds, which was a much shorter period than inspired by the press, than is something implied by the press. It mentions that there were thunderstorms and lightning discharges in the area that were not reported by the media. And so it could be, and this is completely illegible, but I managed to pull things from it, so I'm super proud. There are 4 things this report says it could be: burning gas from oil ops in the area, downed power lines sparking, St. Elmo's fire, or ball lightning.
Yeah, I've seen down power lines that look like a 200-foot egg.
Part 4 talks about White Sands, New Mexico. which you said you were going to get into.
I'm going to mention it briefly, but if you wanted to talk about it instead, you're welcome to do that.
Fortunately, that's all I have for that part of Blue Book. The next few pages are not where I could find. They weren't in chronological order.
Oh,
so
I see.
The next few pages I have are, I don't know. I don't know where they come from. I don't know what report they're from. The next page I have is unclassified, and it's dated November 2nd. It says there were 6 persons near the town of Levelland, and the time of observation ranged from 2300 hours to after 1:30. Now, this is interesting to me because the report just indicated there were only 3 witnesses, and now they're saying there were 6 witnesses.
Well, this is the classified report.
No, it says it's unclassified.
Unclassified means that it's been unclassified, so now it's releasable. But if it was classified, you should see a classification indicator on there. Should either be secret or top secret.
No, look, it literally says unclassified.
Weird. Let me see that.
Okay, there you go. Intensive investigations produced information not generally given newspapers and other media previously. For example, it was pitch dark, rain was falling, a very low ceiling existed, there were lightning discharges, and the sightings took place near an area where excess gas from oil operations were being burned. In some instances, faulty ignition systems and near freezing temperatures were found during the investigations. A number of observers admitted the presence of lightning or flashes of light. The prime source could not be located for interview and interrogation by the Air Force investigators. So, did you hear that?
Well, I was looking at this page. I noticed some writing here, some really faint writing.
Yeah, I know.
Like
Can't
here,
read it.
It looks like there's UFO circled and some other stuff like that. But then I realized, wait a minute, this looks an awful lot like Agent Ether's writing. I think you were writing over this page, and
Yes, I was.
Yeah. So I thought, oh my gosh, there's something really interesting here. But I mean, it could be interesting, but whatever.
It's interesting. I was taking notes. That's very interesting.
Whatever it is, we have access to. It's not lost to time.
So there were 2 points that I read that I wanted to.
Sorry, I was distracted there.
There were 2 points that I wanted to draw your attention to and discuss with you.
Okay.
One is that this report states that witnesses said there were lightning discharges, that it was raining, and that a very low ceiling existed, which is contrary to the witness statements that you read.
Yeah, they made that up. No, really, they made that up.
It also says that the observers interviewed admitted to lightning and flashes of light.
They did not.
And the prime subject could not be found for interview.
Which prime subject?
Which prime subject? Yeah, I was like, who?
There were a ton of prime subjects.
Who did you not find? All right, moving on because...
Yeah, no, that was all completely made up. You can dig into it further. Many people have written about the investigation. I've talked about it briefly at the very end, but yeah, no, that's essentially just invented out of thin air.
So next I have a project record card, which we tend to look at, which kind of gives us an overview of like the type of object, what the observation was, the oh my God, I can't even talk.
It's a useful summary of information.
There you go.
Other than the conclusion section, which is usually has nothing to do with the actual case.
Yeah, the conclusion just says ball lightning, so I don't really care about that. But it's not clear to me which witness they're interviewing or who has filled out this form, because normally they'll send it to a civilian to fill out and send back.
Yeah.
And it's missing the first part, but it said that the object appeared about 2 seconds. It's dated for the 3rd of November, 4 to 5 miles west of Levelland on Highway 16.
Okay.
There were 2 witnesses, one from Kermit, Texas, and one from Waco, Texas, both occupation unknown. There was a light mist with limited ceiling and visibility for 15 miles. Oh, unlimited ceiling. Excuse me.
Unlimited ceiling means no clouds.
No clouds, right. Which again is contrary to the report.
That sounds like the vote for Pedro case.
And then here is a report of on December 2nd of overcast, light variable, drizzle or light rain, thick heavy clouds, and the conclusion is ball lightning.
Of course it was ball lightning.
All right, on the next page I found, and mind you, I'm just going, so what I did for Project Blue Book, I actually had a really hard time. Agent Anderson looked first, and if you just search for Levelland Lights, like nothing comes up.
Well, if what I did first was I looked for a case from Levelland from 1957 on fold 3, and this case, the Levelland Lights, does not come up under that. There is a case that happened on like the 7th or something.
Yeah.
Like it happened a few days after, but it's not the Levelland Lights. It's a completely different thing.
So what I had to do was to sort through these documents is I put in Texas as my search and November. And then I went through and looked for Levelland by hand.
Oh, wow. Levelland didn't come up?
No.
Weird.
No, it did not. And there were over 50 pages. And I finally stopped after like an hour and a half. Not because there wasn't more, but because I was like, oh my God, there's so much.
There's only so much. Yeah. I mean, I found so much for this. At some point, you just have to say, okay, well, this has to be good enough because I only have so much time. Unless we want to do this show as like a monthly show, we have to limit what we can look at for these cases because, you know, this ain't our day jobs. So we don't have enough time to go through every last piece of information, unfortunately, as much as I would like to.
So the next statement talks about Wright, the police officer. And the report says that because the majority of the witnesses were police sources, that some credibility basically has to be lent, although the objects were only seen for the period of a few seconds. So the investigator's opinion is that several possibilities exist, one being because of the amount of rain, they were seeing something other. Oh man, this is incomplete.
Yeah, it's like that a lot with the files. There are missing pages. A lot of the times, the missing page will be in like a completely different file. Some of the one of the cases, I forget which one, but one of the cases we did, it was a pretty major case. It was a well-known case, and the entire case file was filed under a different report.
It's true.
Like an 80-page case file was just under a different, just grouped together in the middle, just stuck into the middle of a whole other file altogether. And then you'll find individual pages will be misfiled. It's not perfect, right?
But I think the interesting part of the first page of this report is that you have to give credibility because police officers are indeed reliable, although the object only landed for a couple seconds. So maybe there's something to that, and trying to, find a natural explanation for something that was only observed for 2 seconds. However, it was not. A lot of the sightings were for more than 2 seconds.
Much more than 2 seconds.
All right, I have a statement here from a farmer that's in Project Blue Book. A farmer in the immediate area experienced a power failure in his truck at the approximate time of the sighting of the police department investigation. And it says here that the previous day he'd had his rotor changed and he hadn't had his rotor changed, even though his mechanic had recommended it, and had wedged it in between 2 points, causing the electrical system to now be non-operative. And this is what the mechanic wrote after he repaired it. So it must not have been a sighting.
I don't know about that, though, because if you're driving your car clearly works, even if you've jimmy rigged it together. I don't know.
I don't know either.
Just because his car wasn't in perfect working order doesn't mean that he didn't see something weird.
Here we have a report that is in Project Blue Book that says an observer saw a swinging object for approximately 8 minutes. It was a ground to visual, and it was sighted on the 3rd of November. And I think it's it says 5 o'clock. It was sighted at 5 o'clock, but it was also in Levelland, Texas. And it included civilians.
I didn't see anything about that one.
The mailing addresses and occupations of each individual are unknown, but there are indeed multiple witnesses. However, the report concludes they didn't see anything unusual.
Yeah, of course not. I mean, that's what I do every day. I just randomly call up the Air Force and say, hey, I went to the grocery store and bought a loaf of bread today. Wouldn't you like to know about that? Everybody does, don't they?
Okay, so the last part of the report I have talks about the possible reasons the witnesses could have seen such things, including this wonderful cursive in the back. Let me show Agent Anderson.
More cursive. Oh my God, that's even worse than the other one.
It is. It really is. So maybe you can go over a couple cases and then we can discuss the final hypotheses that were given in Project Blue Book. And I actually have multiple.
Okay, we'll do that at the end. I'll go over some more of the sightings that I found. All right, so there were I think I said at the beginning of the episode, this was not just a Levelland sighting, but this was a full-blown UFO flap. There were sightings everywhere, all over the place. It seemed to be concentrated in the central and southwestern United States, but there were sightings everywhere. Probably international if I had a way of looking at international sightings, which, language barrier and everything. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of those randomly in no particular rhyme or reason to it, but a somewhat chronological order. So on November 2nd at 3:30 a.m., so this is before the Levelland sightings, this west of Canadian Texas, I guess there's a Canadian Texas, multiple witnesses saw a red and white submarine-shaped object that appeared to be 50 feet in length and 10 feet high at ground level. They saw a figure near the object, and they also saw a car that was stopped nearby. There was a flash of light from the object, and the car's headlights, and presumably all their power, went out with the flash of light. So that's like a lot of...
Where did that come from?
I don't know. I got these from all sorts of different places.
That's quite an interesting sighting, but I doubt it's Blue Book, right?
No, none of this is from Blue Book. I left the Blue Book stuff to you. It's just easier to, divide and conquer. I looked through several UFO books. I looked through some newspapers stuff. I looked through some websites. I looked through all sorts of different things. So I had many, many sources for this. I didn't cite any of them because there's just so many of them. I don't know. Maybe I should have cited them. Anyway, so that one sounds like it could be at least a good 30-minute case if we wanted to go over all the minutia and all the witnesses and whatnot, but we have multiple witnesses and a really fascinating case there that predates the Levelland Lights. On November 3rd, we have White Sands Proving Ground. I think we mentioned this one earlier in New Mexico. This one was at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. Levelland time. Just, keep that in mind. There were 2 military police patrolling in a Jeep driving north, and they were south of Stallion Site. They saw a luminous egg-shaped object that was about 200 feet long, depending on the witness. One of them said 125 feet, and the other one said 300 feet. Here's a quote. "It came down very slowly to about 50 yards. It stayed there 3 minutes, giving off a brilliant reddish-orange light. Then it came to the ground really fast. It looked like a completely controlled landing. It hovered over the base for a few minutes and then it left." Would you like to know the official explanation for this one, Agent Ether?
Venus.
Close. The moon.
Wow.
It's like they're not even trying anymore,
That's a bit of a stretch.
They could at least throw out like a mirage of Canopus or something like that, At least come up with something that sounds scientific that the average person will kind of scratch their head.
The moon.
Anyways, there's actually a couple more from White Sands, but let's move along. There was a report from New Mexico on the 4th that said 10 vehicles were stopped on the highway near White Sands Proving Grounds that, basically UFO showed up, all the cars stopped, and then they started again. Same deal we've been talking about. November 4th, at Kirtland Air Force Base, there was a radar visual sighting. This one sounds like it could be like a case in and of itself. So I didn't look into this one too closely because I just honestly did not have the time. I only have so much time to look at all this stuff.
Well, and our episodes are only so long.
Yeah, and we're already bumping up against an hour here. So I didn't do details on this one, but I put it on the list to look into further in the future. So there is radar visuals. Those are the best possible cases. I love those cases. November 4th, 3 miles southeast of El Paso Airport at 7:30 p.m., there was a Border Patrol inspector that saw an egg-shaped object with a bluish glow that approached from the southwest at a 30-degree elevation. It made a whining or whirring sound like an artillery shell. Now that's interesting because I didn't see any other witnesses reporting a similar sound to that. His car lost all power and the object passed 100 feet overhead. It changed altitude. The object, not his car, the object changed altitude at irregular intervals, suggesting that it didn't go up and down like a plane would, but rather sort of skipped around. That's how I imagine that. When it got to the Franklin Mountains in the distance, it rose vertically and disappeared, and he was able to restart his car and all that good stuff. November 5th, the U.S. Department of Defense issued a news release saying that all this UFO stuff going on was basically nonsense. And if you'd like, you can look up those things. You can look up the news articles and stuff, but I don't really see the point. November 5th at 5:10 a.m., 200 miles south of New Orleans. I think you mentioned this one. The Coast Guard SS Sebago saw 3 unidentified radar returns over an 11-minute period. They were separate radar contacts, not in a group. The first contact moved south and then back north, and it was northwest of the ship. The second contact moved southwest, and it was southwest of the ship. The third contact was stationary to the north of the ship. There was no visual sightings of these returns, but at 5:21, so 11 minutes after this, basically when those returns were gone, they made a visual contact with an object west of the ship traveling to the north. It lasted only 3 seconds and was not seen on radar. The object resembled a brilliant planet and was seen at 31 degrees elevation. And of course, Blue Book concluded that this was
Venus.
No.
Oh.
The object they saw was a meteor, and the other ones were spurious radar returns. Because, of course, that's exactly what meteors do. Also, November 5th, Headley, Texas. A farmer witnessed a UFO, and at the time of the sighting, there were reports of power outages in the general area. November 5th, near San Antonio, Texas, a witness saw a UFO hovering over a field. Their car lost power, and their radio and headlights also went out. So, same deal that we've been talking about the whole time. November 6th, at Donta, Tennessee, at 6:30 a.m., witnesses reported seeing 4 humanoid beings making unintelligible vocal sounds entering a cigar-shaped aircraft that was on the ground or hovering just above the ground, and they entered the craft as if they were walking through glass.
I have to tell you something.
What's that?
I'm totally into UFO sightings.
Oh, really?
I like them. I think they're interesting. These cases are great. You mentioned aliens, like these kind of sightings, and I'm like, nah.
You're like, nah.
No.
It sounds too ridiculous, right?
It's just me though. Like that's biased, right? It could happen.
Yeah.
There could be witnesses.
Well, there's any number of ways of looking at this. It could be that now the description that they looked like they were walking through glass, that could just be a trick of perspective. But just to finish this one off real quick, the object took off and left an imprint in the grass that was 5 feet by 24 feet and elliptical in shape. Now, this could be a blimp. It could be, a car that looks weird. There's some weird looking cars. I don't know. But it doesn't necessarily have to be aliens. But if there were aliens flying ships here, it might stand to reason that they would get out of the ships at some point and be seen by a witness.
I don't want to see an alien. I just want to see UFOs.
Yeah, keep them at it. No, actually, I don't know. How cool would that be, though, if you could have a conversation with an alien?
We're not going to have conversations.
Yeah.
They don't speak English.
But they might. They could learn our language, or maybe they have babblefish.
I want a babblefish.
That would be so cool.
We don't need a babblefish now. We got, what is it? There's some sort of Google translator. You go to a foreign country and like it'll get you a taxi cab.
Yeah. It's getting better. It's still not perfect from what I understand, but it's much better than it was, 5 years ago when you put something into Google Translate. If you put something in there and then translate back what you put in there, you usually end up with something that's completely unintelligible, you know, completely ridiculous. But yeah, well, we should do some more entity cases.
Yeah, you think so?
Well, I don't know. I mean, a lot of them, I must admit, a lot of the cases where a biological entity are seen, a lot of them are not, they're just so bizarre that it's hard to believe, right?
Yeah.
But then again, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about some, like a form of life that would be completely foreign
We are talking about
to our minds.
all things strange.
That's true. So yeah, as far as like a lot of the alien encounters where they encounter some biological entity, a lot of those, I gotta admit, I'm not all that convinced of, but I want to do more of them just to sort of form a more firm opinion because, like I said, there's no reason why they couldn't come here and walk around if they wanted to, right?
Like in the movies.
Yeah. And I've talked about before on the show, like speculating on, you might ask, like, why would they have two arms and two legs just like us? Well, if physics is the same everywhere, maybe biological evolution is similar everywhere, and you have a couple of prototypes of, I don't know, being that tends to be more successful than others, opposable thumbs, arms, legs, hands, or whatever, that might give us a huge advantage over everything else. And that might apply elsewhere as well.
Well, if you look at Star Trek, then that's completely correct. All of the different alien species are humanoid.
Yeah, they look like people with stuff glued on their face. Some of them have a lot of stuff glued on their face, and that makes their heads really big.
Who was it? Who was the old guy in Back to the Future? Christopher. No.
You mean the Doc?
Yeah.
Oh, what was that? Wow, I forget his name. Who played Doc?
I can't believe he played a Klingon.
Right.
He played a Klingon, and maybe even one of the movies, the motion, or was it one of the newer ones? I don't know, but I heard his voice.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, I know who you are. I was like, you can't be a Klingon.
He was a Klingon. I think it was one of the movies. I think it was
one of the movies.
So the next one I have is on November 6th, Everettstown, New Jersey at dusk. A 3-foot-tall being dressed in green clothes with putty-colored skin. Putty, I'm guessing they're talking about like gray putty, so gray-colored skin, and large, bulging eyes, spoke broken English to the witness near a 12-foot-long, luminous egg-shaped craft. I mean, it's... By November 6th, this stuff was in the news.
It was everywhere.
So this very well could be a hoax report. But on the other hand, I like to think that you could have a conversation with a putty-skinned, bulging-eyed alien that was only 3 feet tall. Why not? November 7th, House, Mississippi at 7:25 p.m. There were 3 4.5-foot-tall beings in gray clothes with dark hair and pasty white faces blocking the road, and a truck driver trying to use the road with a large egg-shaped craft. And I could tell you Agent ETA would be going nuts this episode. Maybe I'll tell you during the after hours why. A door opened on the craft. The beings came out. Oh, this is a bad description. But anyway, so there was an egg-shaped craft. A door opens. The creatures come out, and they're making chattering sounds. And then the craft, they go back in. It doesn't say this in the description, but I'm guessing they went back into the craft. And then it went straight up. It left going straight up. Well, that was a rough one. All right. So those are the ones I have. There are a ton of sightings. There are so many sightings. I hadn't really heard of this flap before. I wasn't really familiar with it. I've heard of the Levelland Lights, but I didn't know just how many similar sightings there were where there's an oval or egg-shaped or torpedo-shaped craft that came to the area, their car shut down, and then it left, and then their car turned back on, or they were able to turn it back on. There are so many of these reports. Like, I was getting a little overwhelmed. Like, I'm like, how can I possibly talk about all this? I can't. The answer is just not enough time. So that's basically what I had, and I would love to do more of these, but then again, there's so many great cases. All right, so now It's time to talk about theories, possible explanations, etc.
Well, I have a request here from the Air Science Division review regarding the Levelland case for Project Blue Book from one George Gregory, the UFO Project Office at the USAF.
Okay.
And he is requesting, he wants to know, in collaboration with other ADIC units if necessary, what the missing factor is in their hypothesis of ball lightning. He says, A, what effect does lightning discharge have on electrical circuits or voltage potential? B, could vapor and therefore oil fields suspend in the water droplets in the air ignite to cause an explosion or a ball of light somewhat similar to a flashbulb light when there's mist, heavy clouds, and a very low ceiling extended at that time? In other words, how are they seeing oil fields if you're claiming there's low visibility?
You mean ball lightning?
No, this is oil fields.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so there's two parts here. Part A, he's asking if it is ball lightning or St. Elmo's fire, why would that affect the engines? And in part two, he's saying if you're claiming it's oil vapor or something from a nearby oil field suspended by water droplets in the air that were ignited by some sort of electrical discharge, how could you explain that given the visibility and low ceiling at the time?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So then he asks, he's formally requesting in writing because he wants to turn it over to a TV group tomorrow. And he mentions the due date of tomorrow several times. And what he's looking for is something that answers these questions that he can submit to the public.
Yeah, so basically he's saying, I think you're talking about Captain Gregory, the head of Blue Book or whatever. And so he's asking basically, can you give me something that makes sense?
Something.
This shit doesn't make any sense.
So here's the conclusions or comments regarding ball lightning. In the opinion of the undersigned, after careful search, study, and consideration of all data available, the phenomena was undoubtedly related to meteorological conditions that existed in the area at the time: fog, light rain, mist, very low ceiling of 400 feet, and lightning discharges. Probably contributing to the phenomena were the oil fires burning in the vicinity, creating a fluorescent glow upon excitation from a lightning discharge. So I'm going to pause right there and say right away, they're already using two different phenomena to explain something. Like you said at the beginning of the episode, it's so unlikely. They're explaining an unlikely episode right now with two things because they can't figure out an explanation. So they're like, it could be these two things.
Yeah.
In summation, all of the above were conducive to a ball lightning manifestation. Ball lightning can take many unusual or weird spherical shapes. It is predominantly brilliant blue or bluish white in color, which does not explain any of the red light sightings. And it floats sometimes slowly from distance above the ground. Does it? Ball lightning floats above the ground?
Well, I haven't really done a whole lot on ball lightning, but there are ball lightning cases where I've heard cases where it sort of rolls on the ground. I've read about cases where it floats through people's houses. I mean, there's all sorts of ball lightning cases. As far as I can tell, even to this day, they don't really have a good handle on what it is or what causes it. But it used to be thought, this is what I was talking about. It used to be thought of as something that was more or less completely made up, as far as I can tell. And probably, way back in 1957, there are some people who maybe thought it was real, but it was in the same categories like ghosts and goblins and UFOs and whatever. Like, it wasn't a real thing. And it's extremely rare. Ball lightning is extremely rare.
I want to throw in there that my mom, when we were living in the desert in Texas, actually says she saw ball lightning once. I should get a description from her so I can read it on the show.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, maybe I'll do that.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is enough witnesses have come out over the years that they started more and more to believe that ball lightning was actually a real thing. And now, as far as I can tell, scientists do believe that ball lightning is a real thing, but they still don't know what it is and what causes it. because, lightning bolt is basically the same thing that happens in your spark plug, just on a really large scale, more or less, right? Well, I'm keeping it simple here. But ball lightning, nobody's sure how you can have this ball of what seems like electricity floating around, apparently not connected to anything. It's a strange thing. Nobody's really sure what causes it, but I don't know.
So, in reply to the request of Captain Gregory to go ahead and get them something, anything for the press, this report, which is in cursive.
Oh, God.
But I've managed to pull out some things from the report.
You can make out a few words here and there.
Right. So the report, first of all, says no two sightings were the same, so no single explanation is needed.
Well, they weren't exactly the same, but
I thought that was really funny. And since most sightings were simply lightning, other sightings might be reflections of lightning from the clouds.
oh, it was lightning and reflections of lightning. Case solved. All right, good work.
Whatever it was, point 4, did they skip point 3? Oh, I can't read point 3 at all. Something about discharge from a battery. Oh, the car stopping because of natural phenomena and ions in the air discharging the battery and stopping the car engines temporarily.
Yeah, ions in the air, moisture and water
Exactly.
and shit. Yeah, basically exactly what they said. Water and stuff and electricity and things and stuff and things.
A possibility is also flare from a natural gas. It's not from the oil fields, but from a natural gas.
So just like gas leaking out of the ground.
Who knows? Getting struck by lightning. In point 5, they said the physiological and psychological state of the witnesses should be taken into account. So questioning reliability.
Right. That's pretty typical.
And also trigger sightings or mass hysteria should be considered.
Also pretty typical.
Something about the heat of the engine drying off the water so that the engines were able to start again.
That doesn't make any sense.
Also, witnesses seeing lightning and then having mirages from the lightning flashing in their eyes, making them see things.
That also does not make any sense.
Do you like these explanations, though?
That's not how any of these things work. None of these make any sense.
Whoever wrote the report, it's redacted, and a lot of the report is actually crossed out. Like they were writing one thing and then changed their mind and started writing something else. Or maybe their handwriting was so bad, they knew they themselves wouldn't be able to read it, or that whoever they were sending it to wouldn't be able to read it.
So they had to just rewrite it.
Rewrite it.
Wild stuff. Are those the explanations you had?
Those are the most plausible explanations, besides, of course, things like Venus and the moon and weather balloons and, of course, airplanes and aircraft.
Right. Well, I mean, let's say it is some kind of theoretical experimental aircraft. I'm not aware of anything they had in 1957 that could do this kind of stuff, right? They started developing the SR-71 in the late 50s, but I mean, that thing flew in straight lines. It could not hover and dart about like, this. And it certainly had flight control surfaces. If you saw it up close, you would even though if you saw it up back then, an average civilian saw this thing on the ground or hovering for 3 minutes, it would look weird. It would look like a really, really weird like a science fiction-y kind of a jet, but it still looks like a jet.
I think what they're doing is they're saying lights seen in the distance are aircraft. So they're looking at these individual witness reports. They're deciding which are credible, which are mass hysteria, calling some of them airplanes, calling some of them lightning. So they're taking all these reports and discrediting them one at a time.
Right. Yeah. And the average person, back then or today, whatever, doesn't really have the time to go dig through all the files and, prove or disprove this stuff because it's very time consuming, So people see an explanation and they believe it. Of course, not our listeners. Our listeners are more discerning than that.
And open-minded.
Open-minded?
At least open-minded.
Yeah, and skeptical of ridiculous explanations.
Well, here's the thing about the ball lightning, too, is it might occur once in one location, right?
Yeah.
But over multiple locations, over 2 nights, it just seems so unlikely to me.
Yeah, there's like what, 9 different incidences or something? Like,
Yeah.
come on, a ball lightning. I suppose it's possible. I mean, the Hessdalen lights are concentrated in a particular area, and that appears to be an electrical phenomenon or something. I don't know. But I suppose it's possible there's a ball lightning hotspot. I mean, I
Yeah, but
guess.
did you know this area is typically quite arid?
Really?
Yeah.
Huh, interesting.
I have it in my, well, it's Texas.
Yeah, but Texas is so big. They probably have, just like California, they have areas that are desert, they have areas that are jungle, they have areas that are
Did you
mountainous.
just say jungle?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought you said. So
We
it,
have, there's a jungle in California, probably.
my notes say they have a very small population, an 8 to 10,000 people, and it's normally a very arid area. So any rain or lightning was unusual for the area. Now I don't know if that's true. That's just what I read,
I do remember seeing that their population was about 10,000 at the time of the sighting.
which is pretty small.
Yeah. And since I think we've talked about this before because it's one of the possible explanations for the Foo Fighters, and I do think it could explain some of the Foo Fighter accounts, but definitely not all of them. But one of the explanations for this is St. Elmo's fire. We mentioned that briefly. And if you know what that is, you're going to say, okay, sure, buddy. So St. Elmo's fire is also known as witch fire. It's a phenomenon where luminous plasma is created by a corona discharge from a rod-like object such as a mast, spire, chimney, or animal horn in an atmospheric electrical field. It's also been seen on the leading edges of airplanes and basically anything that can conduct electricity or build up a static charge can glow. You go ahead and Google it. It looks really cool. St. Elmo's fire is really neat looking, and you might even see it yourself one day. It's fairly rare, but it's not unheard of. The next time you're flying at night, go take a peek out the window and look at your airplane to see if you can see it on your airplane. Probably not. I've never seen it in person, but it's not super rare. It's certainly more common than ball lightning, but it's basically just like an electrical discharge on something like a mast or an airplane or something, right? Even animal horns, I suppose. But St. Elmo's fire does not look like a big 200-foot egg-shaped object. That's not what it is. That's not how it works. It's basically an extreme version of rubbing your feet on the ground and then shocking your friend, zapping your friend or whatever on those days when there's more static electricity. So it's just a completely absurd explanation. I just wanted to throw that out there because I don't think we talked about what exactly St. Elmo's fire was.
Yeah, no, not this episode.
Yeah. So I guess that's pretty much what we have. I just have a little bit more I wanted to talk about the investigation itself. The case was investigated by Air Force Sergeant Norman Barth. As most of the key Blue Book people were busy doing other stuff, like Hynek was dealing with satellites and stuff. The investigator arrived on the 5th and only interviewed 6 people about the case. Of the main witnesses, the people who actually saw something, only Pedro Saucedo and Newell Wright were interviewed. And as far as I can tell, nobody went to the sites of the landings. There were no photos taken. There were no samples taken. This is a slam dunk case with physical effects, and there very well could have been trace evidence left in the areas where these were witnessed, but nobody even bothered to look for it. Real evidence, and they just didn't even bother. They just, they went, talked to 2 people, and called it a day. They were only there for a few hours. Barth somehow considered Newell to be a reliable witness, but he thought that Pedro was imagining everything, that he had like an excitable imagination.
Even with a friend in the cab.
He didn't interview the friend though.
I see.
And it's just kind of strange. I don't know why that would be, why you would have 2 people essentially telling the exact same story. Their actions were slightly different, but they both got out of the car and they both saw essentially the same thing and their cars shut down. Why would he believe one but not the other? I don't know. Barth filed his report and it turned out that Pedro was unreliable. The sheriff had merely seen lightning, and most of the things reported by witnesses didn't actually happen. You can read more about this. This is a short version, but according to the Air Force, nothing other than a completely normal lightning storm had caused all of these sightings. Here's a quote. Investigation on the scene revealed that only 3 persons, rather than dozens, could be located who saw the big light. Preliminary reports have not revealed cause of stalled automobiles at this time, although rain and electrical storms at the time of the reported sightings affecting wet electrical circuits could be cause. Object visible only few seconds, not sustained visibility, had been implied. This is basically like what you just said.
It might even be the same source.
It might be the same source, yeah.
Because you were looking at one Blue Book file.
Well, this was basically a press release from like the Defense Department or something.
I see.
And their evaluation, weather phenomenon of electrical nature generally classified as ball lightning or St. Elmo's fire, caused by stormy conditions in the area, including mist, rain, thunderstorms, and lightning. And as we said earlier, first of all, that's not how those things work. And second of all, there were no stormy conditions or thunderstorms or anything in the area. And it's funny to me that ball lightning and St. Elmo's fire are grouped together here because those are two sort of anomalous looking things, and they are completely different things. They don't work the same at all. That's like saying a boulder rolling downhill and a wave crashing are the same thing. Like, yeah, it's both physics, but not the same thing. It's kind of shocking to read this evaluation from our military. Either they were grossly incompetent, really stupid, or it was an obvious cover-up. Take your pick. I think I know which one it was, but, it's hard to believe somebody is really this dumb. They were just reaching for any explanation that would fit in any way they could find,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an obvious cover-up. But yeah, the explanation bears no resemblance to the actual case. St. Elmo's fire isn't egg-shaped. There were no storms. Ball lightning doesn't tend to last for 3 minutes as far as I can tell, and it's never been reported as 200 feet across or causing electrical problems to cars, or, any of this stuff. None of there's no point in listing all the inconsistencies because it's pretty obvious. Here's a quote from Alan Hynek about the case that we'll end the episode with this. What was needed at the time was swift reaction by Blue Book and a serious, thorough investigation. Captain Gregory, the head of Blue Book, did call me by phone, but at the time, as the person responsible for the tracking of the new Soviet satellite, I was on a virtual around-the-clock duty and was unable to give it any attention whatever. I am not proud today that I had, see, that's why we need Agent ETA here. Today that I hastily concurred in Captain Gregory's evaluation as ball lightning on the basis of information that an electrical storm had been in progress in the Levelland area at the time. That was shown not to be the case. Observers reported overcast and mist, but no lightning. Besides, had I given it any thought whatever, I would soon have recognized the absence of any evidence that ball lightning can stop cars and put out headlights. So that's a direct quote from Hynek himself saying that, yeah, whoops-a-daisy, but that's pretty typical. When he was working for the Air Force, he gladly took his paycheck and gladly followed the company line. Sometimes he would put in some stuff in there saying like, yeah, it was swamp gas, but maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, probably swamp gas. But in general, he did what everybody else did. He ridiculed witnesses. He discredited witnesses publicly, I might add, and pretty much brushed everything off until he graduated and no longer worked from the Air Force. When he was no longer working for the Air Force or Blue Book or the government, he then did a 180 and started believing everything, which kind of makes you wonder, kind of interesting. I wonder if he believed it before. We've talked about this before, though, so I guess it's, neither here nor there. Anyways, that's what we've got for you this week. Any final thoughts, Agent Ether?
No, I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time,
keep it strange.